So Saudi Arabia has dropped quite a bombshell in Davos, telling the world they are open to trade in currencies outside of the US dollar. And I think you probably heard the Saudis telling the world 1,000 times they might be considering selling oil in yuan, right? They might accept this currency or that currency. But this is serious business, guys. The Saudis, they are leaving hints and the world is starting to listen. And I want us to really understand why they made this announcement and the not so hidden agenda behind it. Now, the dollar system is truly under threat and it is disintegrating in slow motion. And according to the Saudi Finance Minister Mohammed Al Jadaan, there are no issues with discussing how we settle our trade arrangements, whether it is in the US dollar, whether it is in the euro, whether it is in the Saudi rial. Now, he follows up by mentioning how Saudi Arabia isn't waving away or ruling out any discussion that will help improve the trade around the world. And this tells us that the Saudis, they are focusing globally and not just on the United States. They are moving to diversify their trade arrangements, and this is another confirmation that the kingdom is test driving a move away from the dollar's hegemony. They are trying to escape the dominance of a single currency and they are embracing a multipolar world. And I think we must realize that the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia is starting to change. Now, this is not the 1970s anymore, and the world today is far more complex with rising powers in the East like India and China. Now, the West isn't the only game in town, and the Saudis realize this. Now, what underpinned the US-Saudi relations is the petrodollar arrangement, which to be honest benefited the United States much more as time went on. And this meant pricing all their oil sales in US dollars and rolling the proceeds back into US treasuries. Now, this is big because it created a snowball effect where every country had to stockpile some dollars, increasing amounts of dollars to buy energy, and they also rolled it back into US bonds. And this went on and on and on until now. The majority of commodities and exports are all priced in dollars. In return for all this, the Saudis, they gain security guarantees and arms sales from the United States. But there's also another big element to this that is just as important as military help, and that is Saudi Arabia's financial future. The kingdom needs to secure their oil revenues. We can see the US has cut their oil imports from the entire OPEC by over 70% in just the last 5 years alone, and Saudi oil exports to the US has also dropped by over 60% as well. And this means they are getting less revenue from the United States. America is becoming more self-sufficient for their energy needs, and that's a good thing for the US, but not exactly great for the Saudis. But guess who's taking up the slack, guys? China is. And they are serious about replacing the big revenue vacuum the US has left when it comes to Saudi oil sales. We have to understand that China is the biggest oil consumer in the world, and Saudi Arabia is now the biggest supplier of crude oil to China. Plus, China is also the biggest trading partner with the kingdom, clocking in at $87 billion in 2021, easily triple that of the United States. And that's why Saudi Arabia welcomed President Xi with open arms back in December last year. And when you are the biggest customer around, what you say does hold some weight, especially when you aren't allied with the US. Because from the Saudis' perspective, the West is very vocal about green energy and has vowed to bury fossil fuels, right? Oil is a limited resource, and if you want to maximize your revenue, you need to do business with the rest of the world. So we're going to continue seeing the Saudis build relationships outside of the United States and the West, because we need to factor in two fringe risks that the kingdom might be facing, right? Now, the first, of course, is the freezing of dollar-denominated assets. Right now, that is directed against Russia because of the Ukraine war, right? But what if the goalpost moves 10 years from now? It could happen. The Saudis hold over $120 billion of US bonds, and those can be technically frozen. And this is what happens when you open up Pandora's box, right? The moment the US froze Russian assets, the whole world, especially Saudi Arabia, is now aware of the risk. It's like a sort of Damocles hanging over their head, right? But to me, that is the less probable risk. Yes, I know it sounds crazy, but there's an even bigger threat that's pushing the kingdom to build trading relationships around the world, and that is the fear of a buyer's cartel. I want us to have a flashback to December the 5th when the G7 decided to impose a price cap on Russian oil. Now, what we have is some of the richest countries and the most developed countries in the world banding together and saying, we won't buy your oil until it is at a certain price. And to a country whose major export is oil, that is a terrifying prospect. Now, the sanction has affected Russian revenues and pushed down the price of euros below the price cap of $60. So it can definitely wreak havoc on Saudi Arabia if the buyers cartel targets them. And this is a clear and present danger that could happen. We just need to hit back a few months ago when OPEC decided to cut production by 2 million barrels. And what happened then? We saw President Biden vowing consequences, and there were even talks about reviving the no pack bill. Now, nothing came of it, and it might never ever happen. But if you're running a country, you need to hedge the future of your economy against any tail risk. It is the prudent thing to do, right? It's the wise thing to do. And this is why the Saudis are looking to build relationships elsewhere. It is driven by necessity. And if you want to build trading relationships, something mutually beneficial, then there's no better way than through bilateral trade. And that means using that country's currency instead of the dollar. You help to strengthen their currency and also reduce their need to hold dollars. You are helping to promote a multipolar world. And here's the interesting thing. It isn't just the Saudis who are looking to increase bilateral trade using other currencies. We have the UAE also discussing settling non-oil trade in rupees. And I know what you're thinking. That doesn't matter. We want to see oil getting priced outside of dollars tomorrow. Now hold your horses, guys, because there's a reason why the Middle East isn't jumping directly into yuan or rupees for oil. They have to start outside of the petrodollar system and do a test run with non-oil trades. Now, the problem with relying on other currencies outside of the dollar is a whole bunch of unknowns, right? Do you choose the devil you know, which is the dollar, or venture out into the great unknown? And the problem with other currencies is that they don't really have the network effect of the US dollar. And remember that over 60% of exports are priced in dollars, so it is still a much more useful currency and it is accepted everywhere. Now, this is pure speculation, but what I think Saudi Arabia and the UAE are trying to do is to understand if it is worth it to fully switch, right? They are weighing the pros and cons, which is already an incredible first step. So let's just use the Chinese yuan for example. Let's say the Saudis start using lots of yuan for some of their energy sales and for other non-oil trades. They want to see if the non-dollar currency can stand the test of time. They want to see if the currency is liquid and it is a good store of value. They want to check if the currency will suddenly lose value or not. How much stuff can they buy using the yuan? Now, all these are critical questions. And most importantly, they want to know if another currency will freeze their reserves or not. Now, the last thing the Middle East wants to do is to jump from the frying pan to the fire. So I see this as a prudent move to test drive other currencies to see if the eventual pricing of oil outside of the dollar is feasible or not. And that's why the Saudi minister, he hedged his bets by mentioning both China and the West in his statement. He said, "We enjoy a very strategic relationship with China, and we enjoy that same strategic relationship with other nations, including the US, and we want to develop that with Europe and other countries." But if this works, then we'll see the petrodollar get slowly replaced by the yuan, the rupee, and a bunch of other currencies. So let's understand this shift. This move towards other currencies, towards more bilateral trade, is in essence de-globalization. We have talked about this many times now, that the world is going to be split into two, especially in the oil markets, guys. It's going to be the collective West, the G7, versus the BRICS countries. One part of the world will stick to the US dollar system, while others will be happy to conduct bilateral trade with various currencies. And this deglobalization is going to escalate and really cause havoc in the financial markets. I think we are going to witness two big things happening that we all can't escape. Now, the most obvious is that there will be fewer dollars necessary for global trade, especially if the petrodollar breaks. Now, central banks won't need to hold as many dollars as before, then fewer treasuries will be bought, and that will keep interest rates high in the West, right? And this is where things get really dicey. Now, if rates really spike up in the US enough, the Federal Reserve might step in as the buyer of last resort and do QE all over again. Powell could really just step in, print up a whole bunch of dollars to buy up all the treasuries to make up for that shortfall, right? And that isn't good news because it will make the inflation problem even worse. And if the US inflation does rise, it will still affect the rest of the world. But here's the juicy part. So let's say Saudi Arabia or OPEC starts getting all these different currencies for their oil. Maybe they get rupees, pesos, and yuan. Not all of it is going to go into bonds of cash. They could actually buy gold with it. And like the dollar, all those are still fiat currencies and their purchasing power is still going to decrease over time, especially when you compare it to hard assets like real estate and gold. Now, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they have a trade surplus with, say, China. All the excess yuan has to be reinvested, and chances are it could be used to buy up lots of physical gold. And as we all know, gold doesn't have any counterparty risk and it helps to store value much better than fiat currencies. So even if the Chinese government screws up their economy and starts printing money like the Fed, it doesn't matter if your reserves are in gold. And guess what, guys? It won't just be the Saudis who will start buying gold. Because if you think about it, if the Saudis take some of their proceeds and stockpile gold, they have effectively pegged oil to gold. The currency is just the intermediate step. So in an indirect way, we have a petro gold system, and it won't be a stretch to say that the Saudis could even accept physical gold directly for their oil sales one day. We already have Russia and Iran working on a gold-backed stable coin for their bilateral trade, so it's a real possibility. Now, if this happens with the Saudis, then it will be a game changer for the price of gold. Suddenly, there's going to be more demand for gold, especially from central banks. Now, gold has an essential use, which is to buy oil and gas, something which every country needs. And just because Saudi Arabia takes in other currencies doesn't mean they have to sit on them or reinvest them back into bonds like what they are doing with the dollar. They can always hedge in gold. And this is why Saudi Arabia's announcement to the world is shocking, but many people don't fully understand how important it is. It doesn't mean the dollar system is going to go away tomorrow, but the global order is about to make a dramatic shift from the west to the east. Now, which currency will come out on top, we don't know yet. Maybe it'll be the Chinese yuan, or maybe the dollar will still be the main currency for oil sales, but more and more trades are going to flow away to other currencies because the Middle East and OPEC needs to hedge themselves. They need to secure their oil revenues from the dollar system. And the same thing in business, guys. If you only rely on one single client and they bail out on you, you are screwed. Same thinking, guys. If the Saudis just rely on the G7 for their energy sales, they are left exposed to many hidden dangers that could come for them. There's always the possibility of sanctions or even an oil price cap to push down prices, right? And this is why we are seeing a big shift away. And as we have said many times before on this channel, the dollarization is not going to stop. Countries that control natural resources are now going to have the power and not those who simply print paper money. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Will Saudi Arabia move to price their oil in other currencies next? Is the US dollar doomed? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.